Welcome, everybody, to another episode of Need Some Introduction. In today's episode, Kim and I will be breaking down the latest episode of The Pit, as well as the latest episode of Drops of God, the Apple TV series. This upcoming week, we have the penultimate episode of Industry, as well as the final episode of A Night of the Seven Kingdoms. HBO finally had some follow-up on the viewership of that series, averaging about 13 million viewers per episode. But the most recent episode had 9 million or over 9 million viewers in its first 3 days, putting it not far behind at all the second season of House of the Dragon. And this show is such a quick binge. If you haven't binged it and you're curious, do check it out. 5 episodes, only 2.5 hours. The entire season only be about a little over 3 hours. I think a lot of people will be binging and catching up on this show, and well deserved. It's really fantastic. If you have any interest in this mythology, and by the way, even if you've never watched Game of Thrones and you want something to be an entree to the world, works perfectly in that regard. So I'll be doing that episode solo on Sunday night. You'll be getting it earlier than usual. And then hopefully on Monday night, we have a blizzard coming through. I need to work. Darren is still on vacation, skiing in Japan, lucky him. And Alan, who's been doing the Christopher Nolan rewatch with me, and who's also been a big fan of season 1 of Paradise. By the way, season 1 of Paradise, still our most popular coverage here on the podcast, will be joining me to discuss at least the first couple episodes. We'll see if we can get through all 3 episodes. That's a lot. 3 episodes is a lot to get through. So we will be trying to cover that in that recording on Monday night, and expect me to publish it either in the Monday overnight or Tuesday morning. Of course, Kim and I will continue to cover The Pit for the remainder of its run, and Drops of God, which has just a few more episodes to go. A very interesting direction the show's gone in, I think, this week. And to Susie and everybody else out there, yes, Sona is coming back to the podcast. I found a show for us to cover until Your Friends and Neighbors returns in April. The new HBO Max series premiering in just 1 week. Not this Sunday, but the subsequent Sunday, March 1st, starring Jason Bateman, David Harbour, and Linda Cardellini. So if you plan to watch any of those shows, do subscribe, and you'll get notified when those episodes become available. And of course, we love to hear from you. needsomeIntroduction@gmail.com is the easiest way to contact us, or post comments on our YouTube podcast episodes or videos, or post a comment on any of our Spotify episodes. If you'd like to support the show, give us a rating on your podcatcher of choice, or recommend this to somebody. If you mention us to one person, if all of you out there recommend this to one person on a regular basis, once a week, let's say, if you have some friend or family member that is watching one of these shows with you, you help grow the show. And it's how we've grown so far, primarily. Thanks again for listening. And if you're getting hit by this snowstorm, our snow just melted, and now we're getting another foot of snow. And I'll be shoveling all day on Monday. But you'll have our episodes to snuggle up with, and plenty of good TV to watch in the next few days. All right, let me get into that conversation with Kim. Thanks for listening. All right, Kim, so let's start briefly with Drops of God. I think it's going to be pretty quick to get through this. And this is definitely not taken off in the second season, but I still am enjoying the series, especially, I think, now. It's kind of the direction I wasn't expecting. And Apple did a very clever thing of faking me out, by the way. When I finished watching last week's episode, the screenshot for this week's episode was the brother and sister hugging each other in the reconciliation that happens in this episode. So in my head, I'm like, that's why I was joking with you. I'm like, is this going to be like Highway to Heaven, where they go around solving sibling issues, rich sibling issues around the world? But no, indeed, this was all a fake out, because things are not so easy, even when you do things for the right reasons. And I think it's something that the show is trying to say, that things don't always go exactly to plan. So you can mention whatever you want from last week's episode, but we could just focus on this one because it'll probably dovetail with a lot of these things. But what'd you think about this episode, which, by the way, the title of it was Trust Me, which we find out exactly what that reference is in the final moments of this episode.
Yeah, this episode, we learn about the backstory of this family in Georgia. And I thought that was interesting because you realize kind of where this family rift came from. And you do get faked out with thinking that there is some happy resolution to this story. And the turning point of this episode is when the sister, whose name I can't remember, is at the table in the backyard with her brother, who she hasn't seen since he was potentially a
It's
child.
like, yeah, decades.
Decade. And they welcome him to have a conversation. He agrees to go there. And she gets up to toast and puts her hand on his shoulder and says, "We forgive you." And immediately you realize, oh God, they think he needs to be forgiven for being born. And that goes remarkably poorly.
Yeah, it's interesting. I had actually this season thought that the show had lacked some of the subtlety that I liked in season one. And just to touch on some of that, I think it's really interesting. And this is in reflecting on Susie, by the way, who just read your email today. I don't know if you're listening to this because I think you're behind on Drops of God, but you will eventually hear me say this, which is part of what you mentioned in that email, Susie, that is. I thought was really interesting. It's just something I've observed here on the podcast as well, that there is something ominous in this show because the trauma that there is there, despite all this beautiful wine porn that we're watching every single week, the ominous nature of the show is these people needing to go into their own psychology. And directly to that email, Susie brought up the fact that the memories that Camille has of her youth, these happy memories with her dad, are in this. Once again, just purely psychologically, whenever you go underground in a movie, it's descending into the subconscious. But it's the idea that she has these really pleasant memories of this tasting with her dad in that wine cellar, and how creepy and dark, and how, once again, we're going under the surface, right? And we have it here again. When Davit confronts his sister, he goes back down to the wine cellar, and they're like, "That's the one you pissed in." And he's like, "Do you know why? Because he abused me." So now we're like going under the surface, not the pleasant, the colorful and lush of vineyard, but what happens underneath, right? And that is the thing that this is, this presentational version of it, that we're all going to have this party and we're all going to hug and dance, but that's a lie, right? And the truth is that for years, this has been under the surface. And it's interesting. I thought that it was so obvious how the show was paralleling these stories. And then I think in this week's episode, how much more clever it is about it. Because here we have this abusive father who is like Leger, abusive in a completely different way, like a physically abusive and perhaps monstrous person who nonetheless picked one sibling over the other. All of this parallels what happened with Camille and Issei. But also why? Because of his fixation with his wine. Now, Leger is like, I want to be the most famous wine seller. This guy's like, I want to make this wine that no one else can have except for this church, because he has his own rules of purity. But it's still this obsession with this wine, which led to this abuse of his family, right? And again, it's just like Leger. He has simultaneously given this legacy to this family, but cursed them with this legacy as well. And it's the two sides of that. And yeah, I thought this is actually much more intelligent way to deal with all these family traumas, because we've been talking about some of this stuff within my extended family and yours as well, that there is like all of this, the legacy of family, and this version of it where it's like we all get together and we all hug and we tell stories about when we were young. But then there's a dark side to that too, and also an anchor as well to that people have to deal with. And the show is literally presenting both of these things at the same time.
Yeah, I think that is a good analysis of this. As you were talking, I was thinking of Camille's memories when she, is smelling and tasting wine, and she reverts back to her childhood, and she's potentially underground in it seems like an underground cave she's in when she's going through boxes, and it's kind of dark and creepy and weird. And then you have Davit, who was locked in the basement of his wine cellar because they're punishing him for the death of his mother.
And Issei, by the way, I want you to finish what you were saying, but I want to just interject there that Issei spent that terrifying night in the dark, and his sister, we now have to infer this, but it's pretty intriguing, that his sister would do this like as a challenge. Can you do it? Only to find out that Davit had to deal with this as a punishment. So it's this very different perspective on like, oh, can I do it? For her, it's like a game, but for Davit, it was a punishment. So it's like this two sides of the, two perspectives on the same experience.
Which is how like childhood is, right? You and your sister grew up and you have one version of reality and she has another version of reality, and you are both sharing the time, but you have different memories of it because you've recreated it in your mind so many times. So it's a good comment on how people learn to survive their childhood and the potential negative things that could have happened. You just kind of reframe it.
Yeah, so all of that I think is very interesting and probably could merit with more analysis even, and maybe we will continue to discuss it as we go forward because it seems like it's pretty rich. But some just basic plot things that I want to get out of the way as well before we move over to the pit. One is, Issei confronting his fear of the dark. I also like something that's being revealed here that we see also that parallels what happened with Camille and Issei back in their earlier lives, that Davit's sister, again, I can't remember her name, not a very common name, so in my defense, but she also is a very maternal, and it's just interesting, once again, just to parallel the real world. It's very interesting where your experiences in life could make you completely incompatible with an ex or with a child or within your family, like even with your parents, your relationship with your parents. But those things can make you a productive person. And you have that with like the abuse that Davit struggled through has made him very successful because he has this chip on his shoulder. Again, this parallels the other characters on the show, but also the fact that this woman has been a very maternal and nurturing figure for Issei, who needs that, who doesn't have that from his own mother. Shocking revelation this week, by the way, that she tried to drown him years ago. Speaking of the curses of your parents that impose on you. But the fact that she is this maternal figure to him, and yet she has a blind spot when it comes to her dad because she's still trapped by the relationship with her father. And Issei even said this, what you guys don't realize, the two of you, is that you guys were both abused in your own ways by your dad. And of course, he feels this. He knows that Leger continues to curse his current life. They even explicitly say this, where Camille at one point goes, I was just thinking about my dad, I wish he would just go away. And Issei goes, oh yeah, him. So maybe he's gotten a little more past it than Camille has. But again, the inheritance from family, again, explicitly in the form of this family here, where the land itself, selling that land is Davit's way of cleaning the slate. And you have someone who's explicitly like, I want to erase this, their own past, of course, as well, and those experiences. And someone being like, no, I will cling to this, even if I could be rich, I could have money, I could have power, I could support my daughter, but no, maintaining this story about my dad is more important than all of that. And and those two things are obviously at odds with each other.
Yeah, and Davit, despite a potential reconciliation, decides, as we know, that he is going to take this down because he cannot get over his childhood trauma. And potentially his sister was complacent in that, where she probably knew what was going on, but she chose to ignore it and respect her father's kind of plan for the family vineyard.
And which I think most people do, right? I think in the end, most people, not most people, but many people want to. I mean, I think that's a divide. Oftentimes, you either have someone who can see their parents as flawed people and take the good and leave the bad, hopefully, which is kind of the big theme of last season of the show. And then some people cannot. They're like, you have to have a monolithic view of your family and you cannot accept the bad. So you have to bend the world backwards to accommodate even their worst actions. But of course, everybody's flawed. So this is kind of like the key point here. And of course, from the plot perspective of the show, I think the payoff for all of this is the fact that Camille, long story short, is more like her father than ever before. After saying for weeks now, for this whole season practically, we've seen flashes of Leger's obsession, but in general, we see her doing this for the right reasons. So maybe taking some of what Leger she inherited from Leger, but making a better outcome from it and explicitly saying, I wish my father would leave us alone, only to be like the most Leger person possible here, where think about the outcome of this. She is letting Issei be close to the mom so that she can get the wine and completely staying out of it, so that she will then steal the wine and put it into her competition, because she knows if that wine wins, then they'll be on the guide. It'll be a big deal. People will flock to drink this wine in Georgia. And not only will that, in a way, force Davit to maintain the vineyard, will simultaneously, the people who want to maintain the vineyard do not want to maintain it as a public vineyard. So
Right.
nobody wants this outcome except for her. And it is like a really toxic behavior.
Yeah, she could not be more selfish for that decision to take the box of wine that the Georgian woman gifted to Issei. She is, as you said, acting as her father would and turning it into a competition that will not benefit anyone but herself.
Well, no, in a way,
I mean,
she wants to preserve the wine, which is what her care is. And that's what's really toxic
But
about it.
her family does not want to preserve the wine in a commercial way.
Right.
So,
Yes, it's what she wants, the outcome she wants. But what's so cruel about it, and once again, what really shows the Leger side of it, it's not like, well, we're going to do what David wants. We're going to do what the rest of the family wants. Like, she's just like, I don't care. Like, for example, like in her mind, she's like, I don't care if they sell off the wine and it continues to be like this wine, this legacy of this wine cannot disappear. If this brother and sister never reconcile and they sell the business to somebody else so that people can continue to drink this wine and someone else learns how to make it, then she doesn't really care. She doesn't care about the people. She cares about the wine. And that was always Leger's problem. The wine was more important than the people.
hence why he had no relationship with Camille for 20 years, because the wine was more important.
Yeah, exactly.
History is repeating itself.
Yeah. A couple more things to bring up there. One is, of course, this betrayal there at the end. But then the sexual tension between her and David, which I think at this point, because she's going back to France, they're not going to play this out. But I warned you about this last week where I'm like, are they setting it up that she's going to be attracted to David? And Thomas is feeling something too. He's like saying like, oh, so he's attractive. He's unmarried. He's rich. Oh, interesting. Right. And so, and all the protestation she's made, I hate that guy. I hate that guy. You know, it's going to be like, in the end, does she really?
I know in that scene where they're drinking wine and listening to music and he approached her, I didn't think it was going to go that way. I thought she was going to give in to his advances.
Well, I think she probably wants to, which is the problem, right? So, that whole scene before the approach, she's seducing him with, part of it is to get him on her side to be more amenable to the wine outcome. But I think there's an attraction there, obviously.
And when she says no, he then punishes her by making her eat dinner alone. So he's a manipulative character also.
Or he's hurt. That's the other thing that they've mentioned as well. So, yeah, I mean, I think that there's more to him than that. But yeah, so I like the irony of the show where in the end, he has achieved all this as a way to spite his dad. And I mean, for everybody who's watching Industry, I couldn't help but this parallel as well. If anybody's watched that, where Harper on that show specifically says that she had wanted to make herself so successful that she would be undeniable to her mother. So it's like, again, like driven by spite. But you know what? A lot of people are driven by spite, unfortunately. Okay, let's transition over to The Pit. This is hour 7. It's 1 p.m. So let's start at the end and work our way backwards. This is a very messy episode. Last week's episode was very, very focused and was my favorite episode of the season so far. And now this one was very messy, but of course, that's why I want to kind of start at the end. We pretty clearly now have the thing that is going to lead to this catastrophe. I thought it was, it's 4th of July. It's going to be some fireworks thing. It definitely will be. I think that definitely is going to happen over the course of the season.
We're seeing some heat exhaustion. So there's some badness happening because of the 4th of July weather, but not a fireworks catastrophe.
Yes, the big catastrophe, I believe, is pretty clearly going to be this computer outage. So I just rewatched the last few minutes of this episode with you, and I had so many interesting thoughts that ran through my mind in just thinking about using, or I should say losing, the electronic aspect of medicine. So my first question to you is, this is a really severe outage, which I don't even know. I have to do some research to see if there's been any kind of corollary where a hospital's actually gone offline completely due to a cyber attack. Although we have in New Jersey had some massive cyber attacks, hasn't been as bad recently. We're talking about a couple of years ago. There's some really, really serious ones where significant parts of the hospital were blacked out because these systems were completely.
We also had that Change Healthcare cyber attack, which is like a third-party collection system, and a lot of practices couldn't get paid when that went down. So that had significant negative consequences. I have not seen a hospital go completely offline. We're not just talking the medical record. We're talking literally everything. The phones are off, the internet's off, everything's shut down. So it's hard to imagine trying to function in this setting without any of these modern conveniences that we use now. Of course, medicine, when I first started, was not electronic. We literally had to go to radiology to get the films for the x-rays and the CAT scans and physically look at them. They weren't on a computer monitor. We had to get the lab to print out the results on paper so that we could review the lab work. We hand wrote our notes. When I worked in the ER, we called it the newspaper. It was literally like a 6-page thing that you could fold in different directions to fill out your charting for each patient. And then you had them all on clipboards. So the thought of managing it that way is like hard to even remember how we did it. But we still had the internet. This is potentially no internet service, right? So now you are basically doing wilderness medicine at this point. If you can't send a lab, you can't get an x-ray if we're offline in the way that they describe. So that is catastrophic.
Yeah, so that's exactly what I was going to mention, is that you have this probably situation in these other hospitals that were truly catastrophic. I have to do that research before next week to see if there's any real world analogs where something this debilitating happened. Because as you mentioned, most of the, and I worked in IT also, so I remember when I had my IT company, there were so many cyber attacks occurring at that time, and it was always in the news, but it was like partial shutdowns of a hospital. There was never like this full like Wi-Fi blackout, which of course they have done. They're doing this themselves. It's not the cyber attack that has taken them offline. They are repelling these cyber attacks, which by the way, I think we see part of it right here, that even when we see that the sign language, not laptop, I guess it's a
the video
iPad,
interpreter.
The tablet there that they use is all glitchy, which it makes perfect sense. I mean, if you are literally getting, someone's cyber attacking you and you're getting way more traffic that has to be defended against, that is slowing down the entire network in general. So in this case, they're actually taking themselves offline to wait for this wave to pass. And it could be up to 24 hours based on the trailer we see for next week. So it's a really catastrophic result. But it made me think about two things simultaneously. One is there's a very simple interpretation of saying like, oh, we're too reliant on, there's that kind of tech phobic version of this where it's like we're too reliant on technology. And look, we just unplug the internet and they can't do medicine anymore. And that's probably what we're going to see over the course of the rest of the season. But to your point, like the way we did medicine before was not better. Do you think people had better outcomes when it took you 3 or 4 or 5 times longer to get a CT scan, to go get something handwritten? And people, by the way, who still love fax machines, do you think that was better? If you have a cyber attack on your fax machines, by the way, there have been cyber attacks on fax machines at hospitals. It is the easiest thing to break. You don't even need to like get onto the network. You just find the fax number and you just send millions and millions and millions of faxes to that fax machine. No one will ever receive a legitimate fax until the queue clears, which could take months and months and months. And the only way to stop that type of attack is to literally unplug your fax machines. So I'm like, that's not going to solve things either, right? So I think that we're going to see all that play out. But like I said, the two sides of it. One is we turn off the internet, and this is all of us in our lives, by the way, right? Turn off the internet, and like, how would you be able to do basic things? But then, of course, it's not only the fact that you're reliant on that technology, the technology allows you to do so many things that you couldn't even do before. Like if you think our medical system is overwhelmed now, if you had to manually read paper and hand it to people before they could do surgery, do you think people are getting in and out of the surgeries faster? Absolutely not.
No, this profoundly slows down the process and how people work, right? In my recent reality, we have had our electronic record go down for maintenance purposes. When I worked in the ER, it would be like between midnight and 2 a.m. There would be a 2-hour downtime where you couldn't write electronic notes and get results in Epic. And if you're working that shift, you're like, my God, how are we going to survive this 2 hours? The radiology system was still up. You could still do a lot of things. You just couldn't chart and you couldn't get lab results in front of your eyes instantaneously. So we're all used to this instant gratification, which makes your job so much easier and so much more efficient. But even with a 2-hour blip in your day where you don't have an EMR, you're paralyzed. So this is going to be way more catastrophic than that.
Oh yeah, and then you will not have their medical records as well. Speaking of which, by the way, while you were watching this episode right now, I just had my phone open and I was looking at the social media chatter around this episode. And the very first thing that came up was someone responding. And I'm sure most people are aware of this, but there was this conversation. I just happened to be the first one that popped up, but a social media conversation, someone saying like, why are these computers connected to the internet anyway? It makes them too vulnerable. These hospitals need to be like behind like a pure firewall where the system can't talk with the outside. And I think that's such an ignorant way to think about how the world works now. I mean, like Epic, most of your billing and all these platforms are cloud platforms. If you can't communicate with them, you can't bill, you can't do any of your day-to-day things. If you're using it for like diagnostic assistance, or even not even using AI to do all your notes, if you're just using a transcription service where you dictate your notes, that's not happening on your local computer. It's probably happening in some cloud system and then updating the record. The record is there. And not only that, the assumption that you could have a completely segregated system is that someone walks in and you have their full medical record. Someone walks into the emergency room, they may have never shown up there before. You have no medical record on them. The only way to get their information would be to have it faxed to you and wait hours for someone to see that request and put it through the fax machine, or email it to you, which of course email will be offline in this particular circumstance, or to have access to the electronic medical record, which will also be offline. So there's no way to have some kind of protected network and operate. It'd be impossible. And of course, that is the setup for what is going to be probably a catastrophic rest of the season. But I wanted to start there because I think it's like the big reveal here, of course. All right, over the course of the episode itself, a whole bunch of other revelations, mostly related to these cases. The first thing, kind of the low-hanging fruit, and I think it's something that is also going to build over time, is, of course, it's July 4th. It seems to be very hot outside. People are fanning themselves even in the waiting room, and which I assume has at least partially air conditioned. And is this something you would see in the emergency room where you'd have to have like a cooling center for people coming in? Because you probably have a lot of heat exhaustion, and heat exhaustion when you're 18 years old is like, here, sit on an ice pack and drink a lot of water. But if you're like 80 years old, that could be like life threat.
I mean, I have seen some of the techniques that they use to cool off the patients that are febrile to, some of as high as 104.5, one of those patients. We do use ice packs. We do use the Arctic Sun, which is that cooling blanket that you put on patients' extremities and torso to keep them cool. I've never seen an actual cooling room, but the hospital is freezing anyway. So the hospital is one big, giant cooling room.
That's true too, right? Just being indoors, if you've been outside in 100-degree weather, is already helpful. I want to put a pin in something here that's just going to pay off later, which is this unhoused man. They mention it only in passing, where they're talking about like how many of these beds can we open up, and Robbie's being critical of that. And they're going down the list, and they're looking for this unhoused man. So I wonder if that's going to pay off in some way, that apparently he's not in his bed, somewhere around roaming the hospital. That's just a minor thing to bring up. Okay, some of the bigger revelations here in the episode. The first thing, maybe we start with this. What do you think of this revelation? Now, been wondering since episode 1, what the hell was happening in the final moments of that first episode, where Dr. Al froze up looking at that baby. And we do know that she was a medic now in the Middle East, working for, and it's not Doctors Without Borders, but a similar type.
Yeah, it was some other organization.
Which, of course, lets her bond with Abbott, Dr. Abbott, who is apparently the medic for these SWAT teams. And that's an interesting case. But they commiserate a little bit about that. Let's get a drink and compare stories later. But apparently, is it PTSD? We're not sure. Do you have a guess there?
Yeah, I think she is having some sort of PTSD. Going back to the baby in the episode where she's staring at the baby and everyone thinks like, what's wrong? What did we miss? You're kind of zoning out, staring at this child. And then they have shown that clip multiple different times in like previewing the next episode. And then you see Dr. Halimi making like an emergency phone call to her presumed psychiatrist because she starts having a bit of a panic attack and has to seclude herself in a room. So I am going to presume that she has some sort of child loss trauma. That's just a guess.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is my speculation as well, but I think that maybe when she was looking at the baby and she's freaking out, maybe she saw when she was in the field, she saw a child die, a very young child, and that's some kind of flashback.
Yeah, that could definitely be true. She was in the Middle East, as you mentioned, so I'm sure she saw some very bad things there. And it seems that a lot of these ER physicians have some mental health issues, pretty much all of them, actually. We have Santos at the end of the episode. She's in the bathroom and you can see she has scars on her thigh. So she's been potentially self harming. You have Al Hashimi having a bit of a nervous moment. Of course, this ER physician who's now on the medic team in his free time is using that as his therapy rather than going up to the roof to, potentially contemplate jumping.
And having pizzas delivered up there, usually, apparently, from last season.
And then you have Robbie, who, of course, we know had a bit of an episode at the end of first season. He's going on sabbatical.
And riding his motorcycle.
No helmet. Then you have Langdon, who was turning to benzos to medicate himself. So it does appear that there's a bit of a mental health crisis going on throughout the staff.
And Whitaker, just to throw that in there as well, like that Whitaker has some kind of messiah complex or something, trying to save this woman whose patient died, who was one of his patients. I mean, whose husband died, who was one of his patients, and is still trying to, like, on weekends play farmer role, which I'm sure reconnects him with who he was before, but also probably is like a way to, like, you have to stop trying to save your patients, especially when you follow them home and try to do the farm work for them. Do you think this is true of your experience do you have seen, I mean, there are some, we're not going to get into it here, obviously, but there are some stories of some crazy stories of mental health problems with, that made the headlines in some of these hospitals around here. But just at a more mundane level, do you feel like the stresses of this type of work, especially when you're working in trauma, do you think that that is something that drives these people? I mean, the interesting thing about it is that in season 1, it made it pretty clear, especially when you saw Langdon, that it was almost like they have admitted that part of what attracts them to this work is the chaos of it. So do you think it attracts a certain type of person who maybe is more prone to have these emotional problems?
Potentially. I think you're drawing people in to the medical field who are type A personalities, who want to study hard and get things right and be able to figure out how to diagnose and treat patients, which is just a challenging field in general. So in order to get yourself to the point where you're succeeding, you've gone through a lot of stress yourself in order to accomplish that, to get to be an ER physician, for instance, or a surgeon. So the work itself is stressful. The training is stressful. So I think a lot of people have vices and potentially have a bit of anxiety, perhaps a bit of depression. Not everyone. That's just a general statement, but yeah, I think you have to have a certain mindset in order to even go into this field. And everyone needs some sort of way to treat their inner anxiety.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's like this gallows humor that you see also like in people who live in have other type of high stress jobs, whether they be like firefighters or policemen, and especially police detectives, which notoriously have very dark humor. I guess the only way to deal with, your caseload of dealing with deaths on a regular basis. So there's a way that it can make you dehumanize you in a way, to make you callous to these cruel outcomes. And you see some of that here too, like especially among the students who haven't gotten emotionally attached. They literally have never had to do this before. But then of course you have the opposite, where at some point it just starts to wear you down. Speaking of, maybe we could use that as a segue into looking at Dana, who is a sexual assault nurse, something. Examination, maybe? Examiner?
Examiner. Yeah. I have not had any personal experience with that specific exam, but the entire episode is dedicated to Dana taking care of this sexual assault victim.
I don't actually watch a lot of these medical dramas, so I don't know if this is something that has been explored in other shows. But I did think that this is such a painstaking process. I mean, and maybe that's the goal of it to a large extent. Seeing this protracted examination, it just basically gives this person who probably had to wait so long to even be able to make the claim and then to go through the examination and then eventually backs out by the end because it's somebody she knows and somebody who's in her friend group. And I feel really bad about that outcome. But it also made me feel like of course, it's probably rare that these women go through with their claims. This process seems untenable. And by the way, and of course you have Dana in this scenario being like the most, I can't imagine that the average run-of-the-mill nurse who does this job would have this level of compassion and care and tenacity to go through with all this, instead of just kind of being like, okay, do this, now go over here, because in a way, just as a way to protect yourself from the emotional exposure. And if that's the case, this person will probably walk out after 5 minutes. So it's just like all of this seems crazy.
Yeah, and it takes like the whole hour to get through the exam that she's performing, which is very meticulous. And the woman is very clearly anxious and doesn't want to be there and can't even get through the whole test.
Have you ever had a trauma patient who was a sexual assault?
I actually have not. We have had patients who have come in and had, what they refer to as a rape kit, which is something similar to this. I just never had to participate in the exam.
Let's talk about Abbott for a few minutes there. I just wanted to kind of, so he's come back in the show. Obviously, they bring him in as a tag along for this SWAT team. He's become a medic there. Like you said, probably more productive than contemplating suicide at the end of every shift, like he did last season. But again, in the midst of it, so it speaks to that. But what do you think they're setting up there with the whole, Mohan helping him out with his bruise on his shoulder? This is hilariously, like, couldn't they have a better take of this? Robbie walks by outside as she's tending his wound, and he does this double take, which is like something out of a cartoon. And it's like that was the best take they could come up with. It really seems like so obvious that they're like walk by there and then like look inside and go, oh, and then keep walking. It was like the worst acting Noah Riley's ever done. But I thought it was
For
very
a 2-second bit.
It was just hilarious though. Just like that's the best take you had anyway. But by the way, that has been a lot of Robbie double takes. It's like this show's turning into The Office practically.
Not quite, but yes. There are little passing moments that are comical once you think about it. I don't know if this scene is actually going anywhere. I mean, he just like physically cannot take care of his own wound, so she has to help him. I don't know. It doesn't seem very consequential.
I mean, they're probably just setting up that he, so that it's more expository than anything else to explain what he's doing and how he got into that circumstance and what he's doing with the SWAT team and telling us that SWAT teams have medics with them, which probably didn't know. And also, of course, it ties into this. I actually don't like this storyline as much because it's been dragged out for so long. But this patient who didn't stick around to even receive the free insulin that she was offering him, it seems like a ridiculous. This diabetic patient.
I know. I'm so mad at this guy. She was going to hand him this free bag of supplies, but it apparently took her too long to get everything together and he was out of there. So I know. I mean, some people, when they got to go, they got to go. I've had many patients tell me, I can't wait for my MRI. I can't wait for this. I'm signing out against medical advice. And then I'm like, here's, sir, why you shouldn't do that.
Because you could be dead soon.
We had a patient who has many issues, signed out against medical advice 3 separate times, needed a major vascular operation, which we were debating even doing. And we actually did it. And he left the hospital on post-op day 2 against medical advice. Then he came in again because he had a problem with his foot, which he's had ongoing. And guess what? He signed out against medical advice. He's not the type of guy like the diabetic who is a rational person, but it's very hard to help people who can't help themselves. And in this case, it's a financial problem. So I honestly have a little bit more sympathy for the diabetic than I do for my patient.
Another thing I wanted to mention here is we have this scene where Robbie and Langdon end up going to receive this patient on the rooftop from the helicopter. And Langdon tries to do his usual 12-step spiel with Robbie. And Robbie's just like, look, I'm glad you got the help you needed, but I don't think I want you.
He's not forgiving him.
Yeah. I just don't know if your judgment is, and this is what I like about the show, to be honest. Robbie could easily be like this saint who walks around, but Robbie has his flaws too. And this is a perfect example of it, that not only is he letting this personal thing with Langdon get in the way, he only has to be there for one day and then he can walk away and then come back and continue this with Langdon if he wants this animosity. But it's also like we see Langdon start to second guess himself immediately afterwards. And Robbie's like staring at him like, say the right thing, say the right thing. And it's like the patient's life is on the line. You do not want to let your personal BS get in the way. And now I say that, of course, like purely pragmatically, it's not that easy when you take your job seriously and you think this person betrayed you to just let it all go. I'm saying this in a complimentary way that the show allows these characters to have their flaws. But obviously, I think like as a leadership position for him, this is not the time to tell Langdon, I don't want you here.
Yeah, you got to put your work hat on and get to business here. In that scene where they're in the trauma room and he's just staring at Langdon here and there to get him to come up with the right answer, is very awkward. Like I felt very uncomfortable watching it. So that they did a very good job putting me into that position as the viewer.
Have you ever personally had a situation where you are potentially working on a case, or especially in a trauma type circumstance, where you have to work with? I mean, I think we all have this experience where you have to work with people you don't really like to work with, but you got to do it. It's your job. But have you had that kind of experience where like someone's like life is on the line and you're like, well, we just have to let bygones be bygones and work through this?
I mean, I have had some personality conflicts in my previous job, just with very difficult trauma surgeons, but not in the moment. Like in the moment, everyone's on task. It's not till later when the dust settles that you can kind of think about that. So it's never directly affected patient care.
I don't know if you have any specific diagnoses or any kind of specific notes you took, but a couple of little things I wanted to ask you about, and then just plot related more than anything medical. But what did you think about Javadi's dad coming down? And it's interesting, again, the way you have to infer a lot of character development here, but you can probably see that the dad and the mom are two very different types of personalities, and that also trying to put his thumb on the scale as to what his daughter does. But what do you think about this revelation that he's like probably doesn't want her to, maybe don't go into surgery?
Yeah, he brings down a dermatologist to talk to her in the middle of her shift, which is hilarious. Dermatology is a good option in terms of lifestyle. So I don't blame him for doing that. Perhaps not the right time while she's trying to work her ER shift. But yeah, mom is a go-getter surgeon, strict, and he is obviously a little bit more relaxed. They have a more relaxed relationship. So he wants to keep her in a more chill environment for her career versus mom who's like, just cut people open.
Yeah, his mom, the mom apparently is not happy about his drinking and golfing. So he's just like, hey, if you go to derm, we could play golf together more often.
He's got the right idea.
And another more pressing plot that has tied itself through the rest of this show, and I'm sure we'll still have some additional payoff, is this ongoing story about this cancer patient who, this is really upsetting to me to watch, by the way, having the kids there, and she's obviously like performing being the doting mom in the moment, but we know from everything she said that she really just kind of wants to be alone on meds and kind of ride out this moment of pain and maybe just ride out the rest of her life if need be. And like the husband, I don't know, I'm very empathetic towards him as well, by the way, and obviously does not want to deal with the fact that he is going to be alone with these kids once she passes away. But that is an inevitability. And this is like a lose-lose situation, obviously. But the idea of like dragging her home to what? To what end? Is she just going to be sitting in bed on a morphine drip while the kids jump up and down on top of the bed? Like, what is that?
Yeah, she's made a decision that she doesn't want to die in the house, which was not her decision before because she was on home hospice. But now as she mentions, she doesn't want to be a ghost roaming around their own home, which the children obviously don't like that comment. But I can see where she's coming from because sometimes she wants to separate herself at this point and die in the hospital, which is an okay decision that he has to just kind of meet her halfway on because she is the one in charge of her decisions.
And maybe the only other thing I have notes on is this ongoing story again of this law student who's had some kind of psychotic break. And I thought all these interactions were interesting too, where the parents are like, we're just going to take him home. And they're trying to, as politely as possible, be like, he's hearing voices. It's probably not the right choice to make. And but then also, of course, the revelation that perhaps there has been some mental health issues in their past. And I think that's really interesting too, because I think that's also very true to life. First of all, if you haven't sought any kind of psychiatric care, you probably don't have people in your family that are diagnosed with something psychiatric. Second of all, if people did have a psychiatric relationship with some kind of therapist, they may not have shared it, so the family may not know. And lastly, like, for example, like I've said this about just stories I've heard from my family as well, that person just drank themselves to death or whatever. And they were just alcoholics. But oftentimes I hear that type of thing, like someone who's very self-destructive in their whole entire lives, and then they died young. And then I think to myself, I'm like, wasn't that a form of suicide, whether it's explicitly defined as so?
Yeah, that they're self-medicating to keep their mental health issues at bay. So we don't know if the uncle who died was schizophrenic or had other issues. Most times you'd imagine the family would know if their family member is psychotic because that's not easy to hide. But he could have had profound depression and turned to alcohol to solve that problem. And then you have this dynamic where the daughter is mad at her parents for not telling her. And as Javati pointed out, like, people don't like to talk about these things, which is still true. I think now it's certainly more acceptable to let people know that you have a problem because it's treated like a medical issue, which it is, not just something that you can control. So good to have a conversation.
And as you mentioned, by the way, most of the doctors here seem to have mental health problems of their own. So,
See, we are all crazy in our own way.
well, yeah, that's true. Everybody's crazy in their own way. So it's like just the question is, when does it become debilitating? I guess we're getting into way more of this next week, but I just had some basic questions. Again, just seeing the final moments of the episode and thinking, like, just you speculating out loud. But in your day to day, imagine your computer system's completely offline and you have a patient. Let's say it's not even like a patient that's coming in, because that's a whole other can of worms, but a patient that you've been working on. Like, how does that affect your day to day? Like, describe to me one case, just one case, and not in detail, obviously, but how do you say, like, okay, you're waiting for some tests and now I need to, so walk me through your day without the computer system.
At this point, I couldn't even imagine it, Victor. I can tell you, when we went live with our EMR, there was glitches in it, and we had a very hard time getting blood from the blood bank because you have to have patient identifiers and you have to scan the blood to match the patient's identifiers, and it wasn't working properly. And it was an absolute disaster. So patients in the operating room literally couldn't get blood transfused during surgery. And probably shouldn't be discussing this on a podcast, but nobody died because of it. But it was like beyond my wildest dreams that it would be this difficult to do something that is so routine in surgery. So my day-to-day without just an EMR would require paper charting and having the lab fax you information. And it would just be so profoundly frustrating that it would be hard to get through the day.
Yeah, so as you're saying that, I'm just thinking to myself, exactly. I didn't even think about the blood, but yeah, I think we're probably going to see that, by the way, that, the barcodes on those patient records and to blood match, etc.
You don't have barcodes. You don't have
right.
any of it.
But I was going to say that they have numbers on there. So I would almost guarantee it by the end of the season that we'll have a circumstance where someone gets the wrong blood because someone is eyeballing and they're like off by, because like it's not like the numbers are so unique that they start like they're going to be off by like one digit. And you're going to be like, okay. And then you're going to give them the wrong
potentially there's no digits because you can't print a label
yeah.
for the blood.
Good point.
So now everyone's getting type O negative blood.
And there's only just so much of that. Yeah, I didn't even thought about the blood transfusion, but just you just crystallizing just like one step in the process that is going to be completely ruined. But everything, like, checking out meds from the dispenser.
Like potentially you can't even get medication out of the Pyxis because that's electronic and that's online. You can't even open the doors of the Pyxis.
Well, I mean, the power won't be off, so I would be surprised if they have to somehow override it and so that they can open it. But then, like you said, like how do you check like the dosage taken, all that stuff?
The patient's names will come up on the machine. So you select what patient you're taking the medication out for. There's no patient to select. You can't administer, or you can potentially have the pharmacy bring you up medication that's labeled and you can say, all right, I'm giving you that, but there's no documentation of this.
And how is Dr. Al going to function without her AI tools?
She's going to have to lock herself in a room again and have some meditation time.
Poor Dr. AI. What's she going to do? So yeah, I'm sure there'll be more criticism of AI. And speaking of cyber attacks, from a technical perspective, I am honestly astounded that as bad as some of these cyber attacks have been, that they haven't been more catastrophic because we are so unprepared for cyber attacks. I'm not talking about medicine. I'm talking across the board. Anybody out there who's had company that's been ransomware, and you think about just having a small office and having to do everything manually, temporarily, how excruciating that is. But imagine a large corporation, like a large bank or something, has all of their bank accounts locked out. And we live in that world every single day. We've done very little to protect ourselves against it. And that's amazing that it's not more catastrophic than it is. And you think about AI in general in both ways. A, what happens when we have more dependency on AI and we're offline to these systems? If we've literally outsourced our diagnostic abilities to these tools, what are we going to do when we're disconnected from that hive mind? And on the opposite side of that, right now, again, I am astounded oftentimes that we have not suffered worse consequences from a cyber attacks. What happens when you have a swarm of millions or billions of little bots that are targeting your hospital? It would be absolutely impossible unless you have your own swarm of anti-bots to, and once again, the cyber security setup for most hospitals, they're looking at technology from 20 years ago. They are not ready for a bot army that can adapt to their their defenses.
Victor, this might be the next Christopher Nolan movie.
It could be. We'll see if after the Odyssey, if he goes from 4,000, 5,000 years in the past to 5,000 years in the future. Perhaps. But you know what? It's not 5,000 years in the future. Cyberbots are coming like next week.
Oh, God.
This, the worst thing about it, if we have some kind of colossal cyber attack, Kim, the worst thing possible is, what if people can't hear my podcast?
That could be the worst thing ever, because then I would have to listen to your podcast in real life.
You'd be an audience of one. I'd be recording them all so we could publish them all once the AI apocalypse passes.
We would get through it.
Yeah, we'll get through it all together, everybody, even if you can't hear those episodes.
We won't need any blood transfusions for that.
That's when everyone will know that some things are really, really bad, when they can't get the podcast. Maybe one more thing I should have brought up. We're definitely going to see this cultural divide, right? People who, like you mentioned, that you started when you still had to do things with paper. These kids that are here,
I have no idea.
They have never done anything manual. The way they do everything is like, and then I go to the computer, and then I go to the computer, and then I go to the computer.
Yeah, until you've lived through the time when you're going to radiology and putting a physical chest x-ray against a light box. That's what we used to do. And I've only been working in medicine for 20 years. So we've made profound advances in technology. But yes, the younger generation, although they were pretty creative with the catastrophic events of the first season, these medical students, because they are slightly less reliant on, the creature comforts of medical technology. But yes, no clue about having none of it available.
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting, of course, is we are in a way going back to the season 1 catastrophe, where, of course, the computers were live, but there was no time to do that. You were just continuously in triage mode. So, and by the way, right now they're still in this in-between period where they can kind of keep things normal. But if they're still getting these diversions, and eventually it's going to be 100% triage, like just these people can live for an hour, they're priority 1, these people can live for 2 hours. We don't look at them until, and it's going to start to backlog that way. But I was also going to say that this is, I didn't think about it till this moment, but this is obviously why they've brought Abbott back into the fold. Coincidentally, he shows up as the SWAT medic because, hey,
he knows how to improvise.
In the field, that's all you do, right? And of course, Dr. AI, she actually apparently has had this type of experience as well.
What I was also going to add was, you have these 2 other major hospitals that are offline because they've been attacked. Mm-hmm. And now the Pitt is functioning like those hospitals. They're just going to have to open those hospitals and have them all work in this way.
Exactly. They're going to have to start saying, you can't divert here. We're offline too. So what we can't help you.
Everyone is in the same terrible position. So deal with it.
But that goes to speak to the fact that even if they're not being diverted there anymore, that the situation still is going to build up, because in all locations, they're going to eventually hit capacity. They've been shut down longer. So there still is going to be overflow to them because it's like newer to them. But the overflow is just going to keep backing up, whether it's directly or indirectly, patients coming back to them. Like the patient who went to 2 different hospitals for the shoulders and came back again anyway.
They're going to ship him out to another hospital again.
They'll just have him in ambulances driving around all town to try to keep him at bay temporarily. And we still will not. I wonder if we get through, maybe this is the betting odd. If anybody who does online betting, I wonder if there's a bet for this, that is there going to be, are they ever going to get a full differential on this deaf woman before the end of the shift?
Definitely not. She's going to be in the next season also.
15 hours later, and she'll still be like, we don't have time. You have a headache. I don't know what to do with you, lady. There's way more pressing issues going on. There's always going to be something more pressing on this show than her.
Well, the problem with her is that she's going to have something bad because they haven't been able to communicate with her to actually get her history. And still, Dr. Santos walked out again. We still don't have this woman's history. So that does not bode well for her. I was also going to comment on when they found out what the problem is with the other hospitals. I think it was Princess who goes yes, because apparently she's the one who guessed that a cyber attack was going to be
Now we know.
this outage. So
We also found out she's a little bloated this week.
it's the hot dogs.
Today, yeah, it's true. The hot dog.
But she just won a bunch of money betting on what the problem was. So she'll get over her bloating.
She won. And she'll lose as well.
She won. I don't know if this is winning, but yes.
Oh, speaking of that woman, the woman who's still waiting for a translator, I get so annoyed by this. It's just like, take Dr. Al's questionnaire that she was giving out, those like passports. And it's like, while you're waiting for a translator to come in, hand this woman the passport or whatever, and like fill this in, and I'll be back in 10 minutes. Like, why are they still relying? I think it's in a way, it's subtext to being reliant on technology. Yes. There are non-technical ways to do this. Just because there was a way to do it, you need to improvise sometimes.
It's called pen and paper. Yes. This woman is very capable of communicating, and she can write. I've had my patients write on whiteboards. I had a patient who had a pretty bad stroke, but his only symptom was speech. So he could not communicate what he needed, but he was otherwise intact. And he wrote me down a whole story about, he's 94 years old. I have to get home for my wife. I'm the one who takes care of her. Meanwhile, he is now completely dysarthric and can't express himself at all. But he can walk, he can write, and he is still mentally intact, which is good for him.
Yeah. I think all these young doctors are going to have to deal with pen and paper next week.
What's pen and paper?
That's a new technology I've just heard of. Everything old is new again. If it gets popular on TikTok, they'll all know about it. Dr. J will know about it on TikTok. All right, now I think we can really wrap up the conversation. So thank you again. And we will...
You're going to think of something else
before
we wrap up?
I'm going to cut it off. Nope, I'm done.
I did want to comment on your hairstyle.
Oh, you like this?
Your hair is sticking straight up for the entire podcast until the very end.
I was trying to go like the rooster look. All right. Thanks, everybody, again. And we'll... some show notes that Darren is away skiing in Japan. You jealous?
Darren, I'm so jealous.
So he may be listening to this, maybe not. But more importantly is I'll be doing the penultimate episode of Industry and the final episode of the hugely successful now, like growing every single week, the Night of the Seven Kingdoms, the Game of Thrones spinoff, which is fantastic. So glad that this series, I should say, has taken off. And by the way, anybody who's still hesitant to watch this, 6 episodes. It's going to be an annual thing. You don't need to know anything about Game of Thrones. The episodes are 30 minutes long. This is a 3-hour commitment, and it's fantastic. It's so much better. If you were turned off by House of the Dragon and how dense it is with lore and mythology, this, you don't need to know anything else about it. It's just a really fun show, which has its grim moments, though, just to warn everybody, but still is overall very positive and exciting and fun and makes you fall in love with this world all over again. And I'll be breaking that down in more detail. And then on Monday night, we're shooting to get this done. Paradise, which is the biggest show we've ever had on this podcast, our coverage of it, is coming back with 3 episodes. And that is going to be, Darren and I will be discussing that show going week to week. But again, he's on vacation this week. So I'll be discussing with Alan, who's been going through the Christopher Nolan filmography with me week to week. We'll be stepping in to discuss those first 3 episodes of Paradise, and that episode will come out on Monday, hopefully. We're getting a snowstorm, so maybe I'll have the day to, between shoveling, maybe I'll be able to watch all 3 episodes. If not, I'll watch as much as I can, and we'll discuss it, Alan and I, in that episode. And of course, continuing to discuss The Pit for the rest of the season. Drops of God has like 2 more episodes, I think, so we're pretty close to the end on that one, and we'll be covering that. Oh, and I just had a couple of people reaching out saying, when is Sona coming back to the podcast?
Where is Sona? We miss Sona.
And of course, we have been planning to cover Your Friends and Neighbors Season 2, but I found a show the very next week on HBO. Industry will be wrapping up. Of course, the Game of Thrones series would have wrapped up by then. And there's a new Jason Bateman series called DTF, and yes, that's what it stands for, DTF St. Louis, which is coming. And I told Sona, this is our next watch, Sona. We have a mysterious death. We have a dysfunctional marriage. This is our brand.
Sona also really likes Jason Bateman.
She does, but she didn't watch Black Rabbit.
Sona, if you're listening, you need to fix that.
Sona does not listen to this podcast.
I'm going to call her right now and tell her to put this on.
Just listen to the last. That she'll listen to only last few minutes if you tell her exactly where to jump to.
What's the timestamp?
I'll let you know once we're done editing. So yeah, we'll be covering that show, and then of course that show runs right into Your Friends and Neighbors. We'll be covering Paradise week to week. We're still covering The Pitt, and then trying to keep Kim on the podcast, trying to find something else for us to watch when the show wraps up. That all remains to be seen, but lots of content coming, and we'll talk to you soon, everybody.
Bye, everyone.